I think hopefully we've given everybody a chance to join us. So if we can say a welcome to those that join us on Facebook Live. This is our first Wetwheels Yorkshire Live. So please excuse the fact that we're not professionals, but we're going to have a bit of fun and impart some knowledge or share some information that might be more appropriate. So with us today, we have Bex Lynham. You give us a wave there, Bex. Bex is the Marine Advocacy Officer attached to the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. Is that correct?
That's correct, yep.
Super, thank you. And we have Graham Oliver, a man of many parts, who is actually one of Wetwheels' crew, but he's also he has some knowledge, doesn't like the term expert, but he has some knowledge. He's a marine life volunteer, and you're also a marine mammal observer and passive acoustic monitoring certified. So you basically know a little bit, Graham.
I did work in the industry for a while, yeah.
Yes. So as I say, we're not coming at this from the point of view of being experts, but we're just interested, and hopefully we can create a bit of a discussion. We're also joined by some of our friends from Wetwheels. We've got Joanne Chapman. Hi, Joanne.
Hi.
Hi there. Joanne is a writer. She actually writes a blog, Poorly Parents Mummy with MS, and we'll share details of that at the end of the programme. And also, I first came across you actually when before you came on the boat, you with your husband Steve ran the Yorkshire Marathon, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was really cool. We've also got Steve Wilkinson, and at the risk of being inappropriate, the AKA is Wheelchair Steve, isn't it, Steve?
That's it. I don't know why people call me that. It's something that's been around for years.
Well, Steve is the founder of International Wheelchair Day, and am I right in thinking, Steve, that celebrates the positive aspects of?
It is, yes, very much so. It's 1st of March is International Wheelchair Day. I launched it in 2008, and it's to celebrate the freedom a wheelchair gives everyone. And you know, getting down to being on the Wetwheels boat that I did last year was something I couldn't have done without my wheelchair.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. And we've got Lauren Fordham, and you're quite a blogger as well as a Wetwheels. You do follow us a lot on social media, which is great, and you've been on a number of Wetwheels trips now, Lauren, yeah?
Yep. Yeah.
And you went on our famous whale watching trip last year, where the nearest thing we got to a whale was staves.
Yeah. Still fun though.
Absolutely. We had a laugh, but we didn't see whales, and that's part of the joy of going out there, is you don't know what you're going to see. And finally, we did have Tom Cruise lined up, but we've binned him, and because we managed to get our own Whitby star, Dale Milne. Hi, Dale.
Hello.
I told you I'd embarrass you, but you know, don't worry. So,
it's all right.
So Dale actually has joined us on lots of Wetwheels trips, particularly the fishing ones, and he was actually featured on the BBC One show. On accessible angling, so that was quite cool, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was a very nice experience. It was really nice to see that people are starting to take a bigger interest in sort of organisations like Wetwheels and able to show on a big programme like that.
It was cool, wasn't it? And we're not bragging, but your dad's in the next room and you've caught way more and bigger fish than he did, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
Right then, so the format today, we're going to have a little bit of Graham in particular and Bex are going to talk about the bottlenose dolphin. We've not seen many bottlenose over the years, but over the last year and a half, 2 years, they've suddenly become really common along the Yorkshire coast, so we're going to explore that. But firstly, let's find out what is a bottlenose dolphin. So I'll hand over to you, Graham.
Thank you, Peter. We're only going to go through a few little bits about bottlenose dolphins. First and foremost, we need to say they're part of a marine mammal family known as cetaceans, or cetacea in plural. Whales are in this family, dolphins and porpoise. and they are marine mammals, but they're not fish. And that's very important to notice. And the reason why they're mammals is they're warm-blooded, they breathe air via lungs, and they give birth and suckle their young, which is the real difference there. Now, the other thing to know about cetaceans is that they're very high up in the food chain. They're obviously big animals in relative terms. And just like in Africa, there are lions that roam vast areas for their prey. It's very similar with whales, dolphins, etc. Porpoises are probably a much more localized group, but certainly bottlenose dolphins, as we'll talk about, do cover vast distances. To find their food and to find each other, you may be aware that they do echolocation or use a sonar. Have you got a clip of the sound, Peter, at the moment? That was a quick one.
I
don't know if you could hear that very well, but it did sound a bit like laughter.
Don't get me going on laughter.
But they issue a burst of clicks, which they can then, similar to bats, notice the reflections, and then they can home in on their prey. But they also use similar sounds, particularly a whistle. I don't know if you've got that sound, Peter. It's in the middle of the one.
I whistle myself. No, sorry.
It's in the middle of the one you just played. But so they whistle. That's our interpretation of it is, and it's they now realise that each dolphin has its own whistle that signifies their name, or that's what we believe it to be. And often when they meet, they'll whistle their name. The dolphin they meet whistles theirs back, and if they know each other, that's one of the ways of communicating. In Britain, there are two main populations, one in Cardigan Bay in Wales, and then the one that's more appropriate for the East Coast is Moray Firth up in Scotland. As Peter said, bottlenose dolphins have been sighted along the North York coast from, as I say, Moray Firth down as far as Flamborough and below, and the picture you showed earlier was from Bridlington. We can tell that a number of these dolphins are from the Moray Firth because on their fins, on that picture you can't quite see anything, but often their fins have little cutouts, which is caused from either fighting or damage from boats. And the markings are quite individual, unique in fact. So a lot of photo libraries occur so that you can actually identify where the dolphins come from. You're going to see a dolphin in a second jump out the water. Yay! So as you can see, they're quite large and robust, these dolphins. They can grow to as large as 4 meters long, though it's not often they're that big. You'll see when they come out of the water, there's a very large curved dorsal fin. And if you would see a porpoise, and we won't see one here by contrast, it's a much more triangular shape. They're a fairly uniform grey or brown colour, as you can see there, but we will see possibly on some of the later photos that they've got pale undersides, which sometimes causes a bit of confusion on ID. Again, when they come out, you'll see that they've got quite what's termed a short beak, quite a rounded forehead and a short beak or nose. Bottlenose dolphins are also very acrobatic. They seem to love to breach. They come out of the water a lot more than other dolphins on the East Coast, in my experience, that is. And they do like to bow ride. By bow riding, I mean when a boat's going through the water, it kicks up a wave in front of it. And often dolphins, because they like to play. They come up and they say hello and they make us all smile by jumping around in the water. Yeah. And I think we could either go to a discussion, or Bex, would you like to say something more about the local population?
Well, just that we're very excited that they're here, of course. So we've had a number of sightings of bottlenose dolphins over the last, well, particularly this month, actually. They've been sighted quite a few times. And as you mentioned before, Graham, we do think that, well, the sightings have increased in recent years of bottlenose dolphins. So they have been sighted in the last few decades, but certainly from kind of anecdotal information that we get from people that do a lot of birding on the coast and have been doing for decades, as well as the actual records that we have for bottlenose dolphins, it does seem as if they are becoming more common. Or more common sighting down this coastline. It's really important to say that sometimes it can be difficult to tell if this is a true representation of what the dolphins are doing, simply because the more people that are watching for them, then the more likely that we actually do see them. And I think it would be fair to say that the number of people specifically watching for the dolphins in recent years has increased, which is fantastic because it gives us so much information, but of course that can skew the data slightly because there's more eyes on the sea. Having said all of that, we still do think that they are starting to spend more time in Yorkshire waters, and specifically inshore as well, as you could see from the clips that Peter played at the beginning, coming really close inshore. So a lot of the sightings that we're getting are not necessarily from boats, but they are from people on land, as well as that kind of second video that you saw shows, which is just wonderful.
Yeah, so let me just show a little video now, which is this is one we took on board Wetwheels last year, and you can see from the video just how close to Whitby it is. We're literally just outside the harbour mouth, and you can see here we've got a trip that involved Whitby Disability Action Group, our friends from Whitby, and you might have just spotted Tom Cruise, sorry, Dale, in the picture there. And these dolphins were around quite a lot last year. It was unprecedented. We've been up and down this coast for many years, Wetwheels Yorkshire over the last 2 seasons, but these sightings were regular and really, really wonderful to see. As you can see, we've got the Escabel in the background as we come up to Whitby here. And they are just a fabulous sight to see, and a great thing to share with our participants. The groups that Wetwheels takes out, basically we're a fully accessible boat, so we take people out with a range of different impairments. We did have a great whale watching trip last year that we had great fun, didn't we, Lauren? But
yeah,
didn't see any whales, it got too choppy. So to bring the panel into things, do you want to ask a question, Lauren? Have you got something?
Yeah. How many young do bottlenose dolphins tend to have?
Over to you, Graham. Bex.
It's one at a time, as far as I'm aware.
Right.
But
What's interesting is, sorry, Lauren, go on.
In the lifetime, do they tend to just have one, or do they have multiple?
Oh, they will have multiple, because that also begs the question of how long they live. They think the longest lived female that we're aware of lasted age 60 years.
Wow.
Males have not, I think the oldest male is 40 years. So the female, when she gives birth, will suckle and look after the young between 18 and 20 months. So let's call that 2 years. If you live to 60, they don't become mature for quite some time. So it's easily possible that they could go into tens of calves through their year, through their lives, if they live long enough. And again, that's not uncommon with top, if you like, predators or species, that they, a bit like us, they look after their child for a long while, because that's the way it gets to maturity. That's the way it can learn and go forward and be able to sustain the race the species going forward.
Well, really good question, Lauren. What's interesting in that, as part of the topical part of what we're talking about, is one of the videos we showed earlier with the dolphin rising nice and slowly on that sea, provided, by the way, by Scarborough Porpoise, Stuart Baines. And that was a mother with a calf. And does that in any way indicate that has that calf made the journey from the Moray Firth, or is the speculation perhaps that it is locally born? We can only speculate. If I'm correct, is that the case?
Yeah, I think we've got to be very, very careful on over speculation about them giving birth locally. We don't have any evidence of that. Does not mean to say they don't, but given the fact, as I just said, that they can suckle their young, or they do suckle their young for 18 to 20 months. And it's thought that dolphins are a little bit like humans, not surprising, live in a sort of fission fusion society where they do break out. And there's definite, we're fairly sure they probably do calve in Northumberland area off the coast there, certainly further up the coast in the Grampian area, which is below the Moray Firth. And the thought is that possibly the female will move away from the main pod in a way to protect their young, because there is sometimes aggression between them. And if they can sustain themselves and their child while they're traveling, then that's how they will eventually form breakout pods. And they're fairly sure that the population, the Moray Firth, etc., are growing. So just like anything else, at some point they will try and establish new areas. But at this point, it may only be an area that's good for, if you like, being a nursery, bringing them up. There's enough food for a few dolphins, but not necessarily enough for a full pod. Bex, any other views?
Yeah, just to add on to that, Graham. So in regards to Lauren's initial question, I think you mentioned about the gestation period. It's quite long. It's longer than humans' gestation period, and they don't reproduce necessarily every year. They don't become mature enough to they don't become mature until they're at least 5 years old and potentially older. So I think the important point to note with that is that because they only produce one at a time and they can't do it that often, it can make dolphins really, really vulnerable, like a lot of marine mammals, because they can't reproduce in huge numbers like other species can. So fish, for example, it's very low numbers. And that's really where we come into the equation as Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and why we're working with people like Wetwheels Yorkshire who spend time at sea, and we partner with cetacean focused organisations like Sea Watch Foundation and Marine Life, and that is so that we can get a much better understanding of what the dolphins are doing, where they're going, and how they're using the different areas of our sea. So as Graham's already said, we don't know exactly where they're calving. We have some ideas, but we really need lots more information to tell us more about this, to tell us about bottlenose dolphins, but other species as well. And the more that we know, the more we can do to protect them. And because of that kind of slow to mature nature of theirs, it's really important that we do whatever we can to put protection measures in place to ensure that they have a future, that they can keep using this area safely.
Cool, cool. So moving on, Steve, have you got...
Well, there's just a linked question really to that. One that I was going to put myself, but Graham partly answered it, is you're talking about Northumberland. Obviously, I'm further up the country, where the locale is. You've obviously talked primarily about Yorkshire area, but how much else is there? And there's a question on Facebook, interesting one, that by Darren Rigg. It's saying, are the dolphins closer to shore now there is less water traffic around? Is there any evidence to suggest that's the case?
Bex?
So to answer that second question, Steve, yeah, there's less traffic around at the moment, isn't there? There's not as many of us in the water. It's quieter, which is important. So it's not just about their use of the space physically, that there's less boat traffic or whatever, but you know, dolphins and other marine mammals really rely heavily on noise. So it's less noisy out there, and it's less generally busy, which is great for our dolphins. Whether that is having a difference is difficult to tell, really. At this point, I don't think we couldn't say, yeah, while we're in lockdown, there's been no one on the water for sure. We've had, you know, so many more dolphin sightings, so there must be a link there. We can't say that at this point, but potentially it's making the area more attractive to the dolphins and other species because there isn't, you know, as much disturbance in the water, essentially. But yeah, we can't kind of scientifically say that's definitely the case.
I think it's worth pointing out that last year we didn't have this current situation, and the dolphins that you've seen in the photographs and videos, particularly bottlenose, and it is a characteristic of theirs, isn't it, that they seem quite happy to approach boats and they're not phased. On board Wetwheels Yorkshire, we're very keen to make sure we don't approach or act inappropriately around dolphins, but they generally come towards the boats. They're inquisitive. And even in 2018, I recall an 8th birthday party out of Scarborough, and a pod of bottlenose dolphins approached the boat and were playing around us. And if I may, I'm going to share another little video. We worked with Springhead School last year in Scarborough, and whilst the video quality here isn't terrific, I'm going to leave the sound on because it just really shows just how important or how much fun people get, how excited they get seeing these creatures. So I'll just play this video briefly.
Oh, coming towards us.
Right behind. Oh, yay! That was 10. Wow! Wow! Hey, he's coming now.
Must do, brilliant. Yeah, look at that.
I certainly apologise for the video quality on this.
Really unusual this.
Oh my god! Oh my god! There's so many! There's so many!
There's 5, isn't there, I think? Counted. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So I think anyone that lives locally can see exactly where we are, just off Marine Drive, Scarborough, with the Grand Hotel in the background there. As I say, that was a trip with Springhead Special Educational Needs School.
Yeah, there's 6, I think, actually. There's 3 in this group, and there's some more there.
Who's going to drive the boat there, mate?
That's amazing. I've never seen them that close. Brilliant.
Wow.
Peter, can I just add something about the close to the coast bit?
Certainly, yes.
The other thing is, that first video you showed from Stuart, I think was a mother and a calf. When they're first born, the mother has to swim continuously, and the baby, the calf, has to be in its slipstream. It can't actually float on its own. It can't actually swim on its own properly. So we're not quite sure how long, but you'll see how close that calf is to the mother, and that's so that they're coordinated. Now, there becomes a problem because the mother can't dive very deep for food. So eventually there's probably a little bit of an advantage for being close inshore when you're with your calf so that you can feed, unless there is fish in the higher levels.
Sorry, just showing that one as well to illustrate that.
Yeah.
So it does look like one dolphin at times, doesn't it? But it's actually, you'll see the two dorsal fins.
That's right. That's the perfect example, that.
Yeah, yeah, that's excellent footage. You can see just how close the calf is to the mother there. As I say, almost indistinguishable from being a separate animal.
And apparently, when they're quite young, the baby can actually go to sleep while it's being towed along by its mum.
Wow. So, shall we move on to questions? Joanne, have you got one for us, please?
Yeah, basically, you've got Cardigan Bay, that's a hotspot. I forgot the name in Scotland. Morifeth, is it?
Yeah, the Morifers.
Why are they flocking to Yorkshire, do you think?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Let's throw that at Bex, and then I'll give my input because I'm way more positive. I don't worry about the science.
So that's a really good question, Joanne. And at the moment that we know that there's those two populations, we actually do have evidence that there's a population on the south coast as well, a population of inshore dolphins. But yeah, why are they coming to Yorkshire waters? It's a good question, and it's one that we're working really hard to answer, which is why we're working with the likes of Wetwheels Yorkshire to get this information about them. And you know, most animals in life are concerned with just a handful of things, and that's looking after their young, having sex, and eating. So it'll be one of those. And as we've seen them with calves, you know, it's more than likely, for all the reasons that Graham's mentioned, that they're coming inshore because it provides a relatively safe habitat and one for them to be able to feed in. While they've got young with them, because as he mentions, they can't dive that deep. So those are likely to be the reasons that they're coming down here. We must have enough food in this region for them to sustain themselves. So especially in the summer months, we start to see aggregations of things like herring and mackerel come down the coast. But dolphins are opportunistic feeders, and they'll feed on all sorts of things. That's not their only prey. But I would say that those are the reasons that they're travelling down here is to feed and to carve, quite possibly. But we do need to do a little bit more science, as Peter says.
The non-scientific reason, Joanne, is they're intelligent creatures, and they know that Yorkshire's fantastic, so they're moving in permanently just to add that little bit extra to what is already God's own county.
Can I question that one? God's own county.
They obviously have to pass Newcastle en route, and
well, I was pleased Graham mentioned that Northumberland's got some activity involved. Well, actually, he talked about calves, just relevant to that. There's another question on FaceTime from Karen Reid saying, do they have the same mate throughout their lifetime, or is it the first one that comes along?
Now, let me just, before we answer this question, Karen Reid knows nothing about dolphins.
All right.
Karen is actually from Wetwheels Solent, who were the original Wetwheels boat, and we love the fact that we see them in Yorkshire and they don't see them on the south coast of Solent. But yeah, great.
I'm not taking sides here.
Thanks, Karen. Again, over to Graham Bex.
I know my view is that we haven't got the science because we don't track them. We can't tell whether they mate with the same mate. The observations aren't good enough to see that. My instinct would be to say no. My instinct would be to say that there'll be some level of hierarchy in the groups, and as there are in other animals, and often the victor gets the spoils.
Yeah, I think Graham's right. Essentially, is that we don't know the answer a lot of the time, and in part that's because of the invasive methods that would be needed to know the answer to that definitively. And actually, as much as we possibly can, researchers choose not to use invasive methods to study cetaceans, as you know, if they can. So yeah, it's still an unknown as to whether they have the same partner or not throughout their lifetimes, but I suspect not.
So moving on question-wise, Dale, what have you got for us? Have you got a...
I was just thinking, along like kind of a parallel with hierarchy, can you usually tell how many members are in a pod?
They often talk about 50 being a large size pod to be seen, but just because you see 50 bottlenose dolphins, they could be from a much bigger group. Though numbers up in the Moray Firth, I think currently they think about 190, 195, possibly more, difficult to tell. They may be the same group, but not the same pod. Pod size down here, I've not seen many more than 6 or 7 bottlenose. You've seen probably more together, Peter, have you?
As you say, it's difficult to tell. For example, the video we showed with Springhead School there, I'm convinced there were significantly more than 6 creatures, but it is difficult to count them because they do move. The sighting off Bridlington, which I will show the video again shortly, because we showed that right at the very beginning when not everybody will have joined us. A video last week, they estimated, and it is their own estimation, as many as 40 off Bridlington, which is, that's quite staggering in terms of the numbers we've seen, but it's quite clear from the video there are a good number. But I think also, Bex, with other species, the megapods, they can be in the thousands, but not generally in the North Sea.
Yeah, not here. We don't see. I'm not aware that we've seen megapods of the bottlenose dolphins in this sea. I think the term, the groups of dolphins are pretty dynamic, actually. I think, you know, sometimes you'll see because some of the individuals that we're seeing on a regular basis are very recognisable. Runny paint, for example, being one of them. We can sometimes see that there's you know just a handful of dolphins at any one time visible. But then at other times they'll be in larger numbers, and at times they can form these superpods, although I think we understand that the superpods are relatively short in duration. They don't move around wherever, you know, the North Sea or any other sea as superpods for a long time. It's pods of dolphins coming together, socializing, talking to each other, and then they split off into their other groups again. So yeah, I'd say, you know, pod size is relatively dynamic, and as I think Graham mentioned, the pod size and the Moray Firth is, we think, around 190 to 200, but you know, they're not spending all of that time together all of the time. It's different groups meeting up. And also, we don't know whether there are other pods or established pods of bottlenose dolphins living in the wider North Sea, you know, further offshore, that sometimes venture inshore and join this population. So yeah, there's a lot of unknowns about this population, which is what we're trying to understand.
Cool.
As an example of how dynamic the movement can be, they've certainly taken sightings on the west coast of Ireland, of Moray Firth dolphins through the photo ID. So that's a fair distance to travel. And I believe they've also seen those dolphins back in the Moray Firth. So it's been a trip and back. And I think, as Bex pointed out, in terms of the pod socialization, they are mammals. They're a high-level mammal, and sociability is a key factor in their lives. If we want to be careful about anthropomorphizing them, but absolutely.
So in essence, the Yorkshire dolphins are either on holiday or they're scoping out to move in. Is that
well,
a summary?
dolphins and other cetaceans are highly intelligent animals, so it would make sense that that would be the case, wouldn't it? So.
Absolutely.
Is it also possible that they can be seen further south?
Yeah, we draw the line at Bridlington, though. We don't let them go any further south. No, seriously, though, is there evidence of them going further south?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know about you, Graham. I'm aware that they have been seen in Yorkshire off Withinsea, so they have been seen further south than Bridlington. But I'm not aware of many sightings kind of off the Lincolnshire coast, for example. And the reasons for that, we don't know fully, but the geomorphology of the coast is very different down there. It's very shallow off that, immediately off the coast there, and if they are in this area feeding, then what's using that area in the way of fish and crustaceans, etc., will affect whether or not the dolphins choose to use that area, assuming that's the reason that they're here in the first place. But
Right.
Sightings off Lincolnshire are very uncommon as far as I'm aware.
And if you think sorry, Steve.
I was just going to link onto that, and again, a question related to, on somebody on Facebook. Just you're asking about, you're saying about the depth. Does the depth matter? Do they go down? Is there a limit on how deep they actually swim?
That's a question that's been sent in by Ben, age 7. So it's good to know that we're reaching out to a younger audience as well. So, can anybody shed light on the depth that a bottlenose, and then maybe compare that with other cetaceans?
That's what that links to what you've said about how far down it goes. How deep the water is as you go down the North Sea.
Well, the thing about, they often think that bottlenose dolphins split into deep and shallow water groups, not because of their genetic makeup, but more to do with the food they get used to eating and the style of living. I'm not sure I know how deep a bottlenose dolphin can go. I'm not sure that I've seen any records of that. Their bodies can absorb a lot more oxygen than we can. They've got bigger lungs, and they carry a lot more oxygen in their red blood cells around their body than we do. And also they have a very neat trick of cutting off non-essential organs and body areas from oxygen when they go down. So it wouldn't surprise me that bottlenose dolphins can go pretty deep if they want to do. They're certainly made that way. And if you contrast with the white-beaked dolphins, which, funnily enough, even though we're talking about bottlenose dolphins, there are more white-beaked dolphins in the North Sea that we're aware of than bottlenose dolphins, but they're considered typically a deep water dolphin. So as Beck said, there could be lots more offshore that we don't see very often, and happily having a living. But again, in the North Sea, it's not really that deep. So Peter, when we were 15 miles out, what was the depth?
60 meters. So yes, that was an interesting point. The bottlenose that we have been seeing, and it may be because we happen to be there, seem to be closer inshore, and the white-beaked dolphins that we encountered on our last ever Wetwheels trip before lockdown with the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and Beck's there, they were 15 miles offshore, weren't they, in deeper water?
We thought it was about 60 metres, wasn't it, where they were? Yeah, I agree with Graham. I don't know the conclusion. I guess there's two things there. There's the depth that they can physically dive to, and then there's what they actually do dive to. The two things are probably are different, but it's more a case of the depths that they need to go to get their food. But to contrast them with other types of cetaceans, so sperm whales, for example, are one of the deepest diving cetaceans that we have. They can go to a couple of 1,000 meters, kind of sperm whale, which is incredible. And I choose them as an example because we do get sperm whales in the North Sea. And you might remember, some people might remember, I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe 3, when we had, I think there was nearly 30 sperm whales stranded around the North Sea. Quite a number of them got washed up on the UK coastline, but others were the other side and other European countries. And we think that they were in this area by accident. Because it's way too shallow for a sperm whale here. Very, very, very shallow. kind of as the closer you get to the UK. So as Peter just mentioned, 15 nautical miles out, and it's only 60 meters deep, which is very, very shallow for a species that echolocates to find prey. Or uses sound to find prey. It's not a good place for them to be. So if we hear about sperm whales in the North Sea, in the UK North Sea, unfortunately, that's often not a good thing. But yeah, the dolphins, I'd say our seas are clearly deep enough for them to get what they need.
Yeah, cool. So, Lauren, have you got another question for us? Want to dive in with another?
Do they tend to, you talked a lot about mothers and calves. Do they tend to, is there such thing as a nuclear family, or do they tend to be like matriarchal fathers do the creating and then spin off? Do they tend to stick together?
No.
Again, another good question. I'm tempted to throw in a joke about Newcastle, but I won't, because it might be somewhat inappropriate, Steve.
I think so.
Instead, I'll leave that one to Bex.
Probably relevant to that is there's another question on Facebook which just come up. Do they have a regional accent? Is there a Geordie dolphin?
Well, if we go with Lawrence first.
Bex, do you want to say about the
about the nuclear family? Sorry, I'm just thinking about all the answers to that question. So, do they have a nuclear family? That's a really good question. I think that as far as I'm aware, the males will often leave the pods when they kind of get old enough. As I said, I think the pod's pretty dynamic, so they don't stick together for life, so to speak. But different members of a group will serve different purposes. So, for example, a mother dolphin might need to go and hunt, and therefore she will say to other dolphins within the pod, grandmothers, for example, or other mothers, kind of look after my young one for a short period while she does that kind of thing. So I'm not sure about the nuclear family so much as the sense of the importance of the pod as a community and sharing responsibilities for the different functions that they all need to undertake.
There's certainly good evidence of nursery type formations, as Beck says, where you get a group, rarely with males as I understand it, but sharing the burden, if you like.
Right, yeah. Sorry, Joanne, do you want to throw a question out there, or another one?
Yeah, I've got a stupid one.
Go on, I like stupid ones.
Basically, we're in lockdown. Does anyone know if it's changed the behaviour of a bottlenose dolphin?
Has our lockdown changed the behaviour of bottlenose dolphin? I suppose.
Are they keeping 2 meters apart? That's the important bit.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
I think that's a video evidence right there that Peter has that they are not abiding by the rules.
That was last year, though, wasn't it?
Well, while we're exploring this, carry on. I shall just reshare the one taken at Bridlington recently.
I think some of the footage is old, isn't it? But the one of the mum and the calf was taken by Stuart just a few short weeks ago. So,
During lockdown.
You wouldn't really expect mum and calf to social distance anyway. So I think they can get away with it. But I think it goes
around in the North Sea.
Yeah, no one's on patrol. So I think, yeah, another good question, Joanne, and I think the honest answer, as I kind of alluded to before, is we don't know the answer, because one of the challenges for us is that we can't go out and do our normal surveying work. So we normally have a network of volunteers that are doing surveys on land, and we usually work with people like Peter at Wetwheels and Graham to do surveys at sea as well, and we just don't have that data. The information that we have recently has come from people that just happen to live by the sea and have been able to get that a chance to see the dolphins and get that sighting because they live there and they've been taking the daily exercise. So whether it's changed the behaviour or not, I don't know. As we talked about before, they've had the chance to have a break from some of our activities because there's not you know, as many people on the sea or in the sea. It's probably not as noisy, which they quite like. But then, you know, Pete also mentioned that they, as you can see from the videos, they can be quite at home near some of the vessels. It doesn't appear to bother them. So yeah, who knows if it's really changed their behaviour? We really can't tell.
Because you said they come to Yorkshire for various reasons and also because of food. So I don't know whether they're getting their food from the sea or from us. If there's less people, there might be less food, but I don't know if they get their food from the sea.
Yeah, they certainly get the food from the sea. They're not a scavenger, I don't think, the way that our Whitby's famous seagulls are.
No.
We're all starving and missing their fish and chips at the moment. But there's a possible link to the fact that perhaps we are out fishing at the moment, but I think the fishing fleets are still out there anyway. So,
right.
But yeah, have you got another question, Dale?
You were talking about before their life expectancy, and what is, like, in comparison to, so you say you've said before that the furthest north pods are in Moray Firth. Do they have a higher life expectancy to any of the other pods that are found within the English coast?
Again, it's back to evidence, Dale. The fact that they know some have aged to 40 or 60 years is because they've been able to relatively regularly photograph ID those particular dolphins. There will be some evidence within that photographic album of sightings of individuals, and so over time they will probably be able to build up a profile of what ages they make in the Moray Firth, and possibly, if we were to be able to compare it with Cardigan or somewhere like that, be able to find out if there's a difference. But again, unfortunately, we've said it a few times, we just don't have enough evidence.
I think, sadly, that is a theme. When I say sadly, it's sometimes not. Is it always appropriate to know everything about everything as a species, as human beings? We have this thirst for knowledge, and it's appropriate, but equally, it's nice to know some things are just not known at the moment. Just another question that's coming online from a young man. How high can a dolphin jump out of the sea? Harry, aged 8. It sounds like a line from a joke, but you know, it's a serious question. Anybody know?
Well, 15 to 30 feet is quoted, and that sadly is quoted from some of the aquariums where in America they keep dolphins and train them to jump that high. Observations in real world, 15 would be large jump.
Yeah, no, that's terrific. That's terrific. On the panel, any other questions? Oh, we have
just linked. Can I ask a question linked to just Graham's response to that? Is that there's often, you know, sort of people condemn aquariums and shows like you're talking about in mainly in America. Is there a good way to do that kind of thing? Because it's, for many people, that's the best chance to see bottlenose dolphins. Is there a right way to do it so you can go and see them without being out in the sea?
Well, my own answer to that, and I'm going to jump in first, is because I don't need to be as political, is the best way to see a dolphin is without a doubt at sea in its natural habitat. And in Whitby, for example, you've got the Whitby whale watching boats, and obviously now Wetwheels enables the sea to be accessible to everybody. So that is by far the best environment to see them. But there perhaps is a place for aquariums and such, but you're right, it's a controversial subject. Any other input from anybody else there?
Yeah, I would second that. Just thinking about that video that Peter showed earlier with those, mainly for the sound, with the kids, the screaming that they were, the noises that they were making in seeing those dolphins. There is there's no way of replacing that experience of seeing dolphins or any cetaceans or at sea. It's such a wonderful experience, and you'll just never forget it. It is a life-changing sighting, I think, to see something like a bottlenose dolphin at sea. Undoubtedly, that is the best place to see them. And I think the way that I think about it is, if we think about what we're talking about in terms of the fact that we know that a lot of the dolphins that are visiting Yorkshire's waters for their holidays or whatever are coming from the Moray Firth. That's a huge distance. We're talking hundreds of miles that they're travelling, and we know that they've been spotted over in Ireland as well. So we're talking about a species that is highly, highly mobile. So do we think that we can provision for them in a facility like that in the same way that they are provisioned for in the natural environment? It would be my question to respond to that question. There are, but I absolutely take your point, Steve, that there are real advantages to aquariums. They have amazing educational value for showing people what lives in our sea, and that's really important at a time where, a lot of the time it's easy to forget what's out of sight is therefore out of mind. You can't see a lot of what lives in the sea, so they do have huge importance from an educational point of view. And also, if for example, if an animal such as a whale or a dolphin, dolphins particularly, were injured in any way, but could be rehabilitated, but potentially couldn't be released back into the natural environment, have been able to provide that facility is very valuable. But generally speaking, I would say that we believe that wild dolphins should remain as such.
I think there's an easy contrast to make with the time we're living through. Look how wild humans have got in the last 7 weeks of lockdown, not being able to leave their homes, go out and meet people. These dolphins are as clever as we are. They just want to get out there. They shouldn't be kept in small locations.
Well said. I agree with that.
I agree.
When I saw some in Tenerife in the wild, what I found was they don't need to do elaborate tricks. Their natural behaviour and them in their natural home is breathtaking as it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic comment. Again, the videos we've shown, you don't need props to enjoy dolphins. They're an amazing creature. And I hate to say, guys, but we're almost running at an hour now. So I think we maybe ought to think about wrapping it up. What I'd like to say is thank you to everybody on the panel that's joined us today, and everybody that's joined us on Facebook Live. If you have asked a question on Facebook Live, we will be putting you into a draw for a voucher to go on Wetwheels as and when we can resume. And also, we've got a bit of a question for people. If you want to send us the answer, we mentioned a local school that we went on a trip with, and we saw lots of dolphins. If you send us the answer to that, which school it is, we'll also put you in the draw for a voucher to take a whale watching trip on Wetwheels Yorkshire. So hopefully that everyone's had a bit of fun. Bex, can I pass over to you to speak a little bit about your role and such?
Yep, absolutely. So as I've already mentioned, one of the reasons that I'm on this call today is because we're working with Wetwheels Yorkshire to support our collection of information on bottlenose dolphins and other cetaceans that are living in the sea. So I would just appeal to people to let us know if they've seen something. If you've seen a whale or a dolphin or a porpoise, then get in contact with us. So you can either, Google us, Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. You can send a message directly to us on Facebook, or you can do that via Wetwheels and they'll pass the message on. If you do spot something, if you're able to submit that sighting as a record, you can do that through our project partners website, and that's Sea-Watch Foundation. So just type in Sea-Watch Foundation sightings and you'll actually be able to provide that data to us, which is really, really, really valuable data. So if you're walking along the coast, you've got, doing your daily exercise, whatever, and you spot something. In fact, even if you're not sure if it's a whale or a dolphin or a porpoise, that's fine. You can tell us that. I would just ask you to report that to us, because it is really important information, tells us a lot. So that would be great. Thank you.
That's fabulous. So this was our first Wetwheels Yorkshire Live. If you have enjoyed it and you'd like us to run something again, we can talk about minke whales, we can talk about any subject that's related to what we do. We'd be keen to hear from you. If you want further information on what we've talked about today, drop us an email at Wetwheels Yorkshire and we will send out a link for some of the videos and some links to further information. And finally, I'd just like to thank everybody that has been involved today. I hope everybody's enjoyed it. I'm just going to share our final screen, which is our credits. As I say, particular thanks to Scarborough Porpoise, sorry there, Stuart Baines, he's provided some of the great footage, and of course our panel. And we will be posting this on YouTube and it will be on our Facebook page, non-live later. So that's cool. Thank you very much, everybody. And we will perhaps see you again at some point in the future. So that's us. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Enjoyed it.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.